If I borrow from the joke that was said by Manish yesterday, I'm the doer, the foolish doer who doesn't know what he's doing, in the company of four celebrated academicians who think, analyze, and make judgments and on how we do things and how we don't do things. So the whole crowd is a mixture of all this set of people. But so my job is here only to sort of welcome all of them. And also probably as a doer, lots of questions come into my mind because as probably would have heard that I had been trying to do the digital transformation for a long time. In India, as now I try to do it in multiple other countries too. So a lot of these questions with respect to the how do we manage this transformation, AI and especially AI is going to make a big change. AI governance and future of work has become a very critical dimension in any new solution design, especially starting from zero. So a lot of these questions do come into my mind, and I randomly wrote down some of them, and I'm hoping that I'll get some. I mean, I'm lucky that I got a lot of answers in the last 2 days from sessions done by some brilliant colleagues, and I'm hoping to get some more. And so, let me just say the way the commonsensical way in which I want to set the context is that what we are seeing is that last few centuries we saw multiple big transformations, disruptions, whether it is printing press on one side or internet on the other side, a computer and everything. They all had significant impact on what work meant, where people lived, what skills had value, and what governments needed to do. But the good thing was that while it had a significant disruption, it takes multiple decades to pan out. But what is very different today is that the ripples are moving so fast that it is not multiple centuries or decades, it is multiple months. And probably in few months' time, you'll see multiple days. So that is where the challenge become even more significant. And very often, when you think as a policymaker who thinks about the governance dimension, normally one of the criticisms we always talk about the governance is that governance go slow compared to the technological change. This becomes even more challenging now. So let me just put down some of my thoughts for us to deliberate. We in the last few months we saw what the big changes that the AI can do. It is a cross-cutting change. Normally, if there is some big change happened in financial sector, the people who backed it only the financial sector people, although the common people also had something, but a big impact was here. But here it is for everybody. Okay, it is not about automation of routine. It is about what AI can perform the cognitive. So here, I'm just thinking about three tension that comes in my mind when I look at AI governance and future of work. The first tension is that of the governance itself. When it comes to governance of AI, question that comes: who governs AI? Who benefits? Who bears the cost of disruption? These are not just technical questions. These are political and moral questions, not just technical ones. In fact, suddenly I remembered a friend of mine, or rather a much senior of mine, who was a regulator in UK long ago, and he sort of retired and he's no more there. So he was explaining some of the challenges he faced as a regulator of automation. He said in one of the universities, he was a regulator for universities. And when they were doing some investigation, they found that the university had an automation algorithm to choose the students and for admission. So there are a number of parameters in which they were built in. And then when there was some complaint or something come, and they did a deeper investigation on the code behind, and they found that there was a 5% negative weightage to people who come from India and Pakistan. So it is a real story. I mean, so he told me as a regulator. That is long ago. But the interesting is it was possible to investigate and figure out. But today, when we have AI, which is the omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, coming to the conclusions, how much of the biases are going to be influencing its decisions becomes a very critical question in the governance. So here, the tension is between speed and safety. AI development moving at a very, very fast pace. And the frameworks are not simply not designed to match the frameworks for the governance. The EU Act, which took years to negotiate, is already facing questions whether it is risk categories are the most appropriate ones. India is developing its own digital governance framework, and the choices made here, given the scale of this country's workforce and its digital ambitions, will matter not just domestically but globally. In fact, I remember, as the independent director, I work in a company, and when we were discussing about the impact of DPDP Act and the usage of data for the AI training and so on and so forth, and we got some legal experts to come and discuss with us. And what we found was, when you start pushing the edges, many of those things are not very clear. It means that some of those dimensions are already outdated or not ready. That becomes a challenge. So if you do things so fast, like the criticism that we have about the Europeans is that it suppresses innovation. Okay, if you do it too slowly, you see the feel to the players, whether it's corporate, nationals, or so on and so forth. So there is practically no middle ground. It's a continuous balancing act, like the people who play on the trapeze. The next tension that is on the governance. Even the biggest section is the future of work. When I try to read and listen to how some people have a very dystopian point of view. They say that AI will replace most of the human jobs and they will be completely out of work. And the other school of thought is that it is the thought of abundance, that it is going to make workers more productive, more valuable, and it is going to create a lot of benefits, whether it is in health or education or legal or anything. You get a much more better output. So there will be people, like we were discussing with John, generally people will be, their quality of life will improve. Then, in fact, I had a good argument and discussion with John about when the quality of life goes up, but the welfare of the people of the privileged class, if it goes up faster, will the common man be happier or not so happy? Will that lead to social unrest, or will that reach to general happiness and people lived happily ever after thought? We don't know. We are yet to come. So these are the kind of questions that we never had to face, and we are the things to be. So then new categories of work will definitely come, which I'm not. I'm more an abundance thought, more an optimist. Especially if you say that, we heard a discussion that if you want all this AI, the electricity generation capacity has to double or more than double, even in India or in US. Who's going to build up all those plants? We need labor. We need to have so many data centers. Who's going to build up all those data centers? I don't think robots are ready to come and say, hey, make this data center, and they're not going to make it. There's still a lot of human. There'll be some new kind of work on AI workflow engineers, and so everything could come. But which direction it takes, what is going to be the challenges of transition? So here lies the tension between productivity and dignity. Every study that examines AI impact on knowledge work shows that there's significant productivity improvement. Even today we saw some of them. Okay. But writers, well supported by AI tools, they produce more, faster, and even higher quality, and good news. But productivity gains no more translate to widely shared prosperity. The history of technological reception is also the history of transition cost. Transition cost was always a challenge. But the good thing was, in many of the transition that we experienced, was there was still some time left for the transition to adopt. Okay, so the tension becomes between innovation and accountability also become a challenge. Companies building the most powerful AI systems understandably advocates an environment that allows rapid development. Many also, to their credit, genuinely grapple with questions of safety and responsibility. But the incentive structure of the competitive market are not naturally aligned with the kind of careful, transparent, and accountable development. So what does, I mean, since we are all in India and I primarily work in India. So I was thinking, what is a specific impact for India? I mean, we have global experts who are here, there, who could give an outside in point of view. So we are we are one of the world's youngest and most rapidly digitizing workforce. It has a fantastic technology sector who has sort of benefited in the economic well-being of our country. But it faces a very specific challenge. While a lot of new work coming, we have a very significantly large population of people who are doing IT, BPO work, coding work, and significantly large number of them. And it is normally when a new sort of journey comes, new sets of people come, learn, and all people probably a little retire early, because he's going to retire much early unless they redefine unless they retrain themselves, and that is not something that they can do by themselves. So, what is the kind of affirmative action that can go into this fast changing environment of a large number of people who are relatively well to do as per our Indian society, and who had come in with a lot of confidence that the future is very bright. If you ask anybody who sort of 5 years or 7 years ago who completed, and whether it is BTech in IT or even BSc IT or even something to where they said they felt that a life was, they have jumped in the right field, they're in the right stream, the future is really bright compared to, many other. But I suddenly realized, I mean, a lot of questions that come, it may not be that hunky-dory in a very short period of time. Not that it will happen overnight. It may take 4 years, 5 years, but the impact is going to be very high. In some other cases where the proliferation can be done. So what do we actually need? So first, the governance must be adaptive and not just reactive. We need regulatory framework that are designed to evolve, because things are changing. In fact, who was our lawyer friend yesterday made a very interesting observation. In fact, I was commenting about that yesterday. He's did a fantastic work of, working for his clients and making them. And later when Manish asked him a question, he said, yes, I mean, do you really think this is the fair thing to do? So he admitted, and I think that is, we all understand, is that the current legal structure does not take into account many of these dimensions. So it needs a significant change in the legal structure itself. And you need to have an ability to evolve. It's not that we did one cleanup act and we created normally what we are used to is create a committee, okay, tell them redesign the whole thing. It could be, we did that with the IT, Information Technology Act multiple times, and Income Tax Act multiple times. But it is like, it takes a few years of process, and after that, now we can forget it for 10 years. But that's not how it is. So that becomes a challenge. Second is the future of work requires active investment and not just passive optimism. It is not enough to say that new technologies create new jobs. Historically, we often do. But what matters is the transition, as I was saying earlier. Whether workers have the access to retraining, whether institutions like schools and universities adapt their curriculum in time, whether the social safety nets are designed for an economy where the nature of the employment is changing. Especially, it becomes very critical for the educational system, because the current educational system, if you look at, I have some involvement in the education system, because I also mentor a school and college for the underprivileged children. And then I realized that when I look at the syllabus, I don't even know what is the syllabus about. Completely irrelevant. It's an officially approved syllabus of one of the best universities in our country. So I tell them that while you need to pass the exam by reading all these things, I'm creating a completely different curriculum for them, say that for them to be ready to be adaptive in future. Otherwise, and to make them understand that if they don't do that, they will become truly irrelevant in a short period of time. So see, the the third thought that I wanted to share is that the voices in the room must expand. The conversation that shape AI governance tend to happen in a relatively small number of rooms. Okay, boardrooms, regulatory agencies, international standard bodies. The people whose working lives will most directly be transferred has to start thinking about it and start to become a part of they giving their concerns and worries, etc., so that we can develop the policy. So let me close. It's my time, and I'm neither a pessimist or an optimist, but I'm a realist who believes that the outcomes of this transformation are genuinely open, and they will be determined not by technology alone, but by the choices we make and how we develop it, deploy it, and govern it. So the question is not just about legal, they're not about technology, it's a lot about human dimension. And that is where there's a lot of thought has to go. Thank you. And now it's my time up. And now, I was generally rambling on my general thoughts, and now we are privileged to have, our academic friends coming one by one. And now, Bapna, I leave it to you to take the next session.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to present my research here today. It's been an amazing day and a half, and I really look forward to continuing my conversation with many of you. This paper is co-authored with Russell Funk and Alan Benson, the three of us at the Carlson School of Management, University of Minnesota. Now, before I delve into the actual research study, I want to give you a little bit of a backstory of how this study came about. I've been working with a company in India. Actually, it's TeamLease, thanks to Manish's introduction to the folks at TeamLease. Been working with TeamLease for about a decade. And in one of my conversations with my collaborator there, he said something to me which was striking. He said, "We are unable to fill all our open positions." And that stayed with me. I went back to Minneapolis, spoke with my co-authors, and we came back to TeamLease with this suggestion that perhaps we want to encourage rejected candidates to reapply, and in particular, perhaps we want to encourage rejected women to reapply. So these people, by rejected women, I mean they've applied for a particular position, they were rejected, and we want to encourage them to reapply. So why were we interested in engaging this pool of candidates? This is because for every position, they have at least 100 applicants. And then, because of the constraint that they have, they select one candidate. They reject the other 99. This doesn't mean candidate number 2 to 20 or even beyond may be perfectly fine for that position, or several others in the pool could be fine for other jobs within TeamLease. So we were like, okay, let's try to engage the rejected candidates. In particular, let's try to engage women. So why do we want to try to re-engage women who are rejected? This is because of what previous literature tells us. So previous studies tell us that women are less likely to reapply in contexts that have rejected them. That is, to companies that have rejected them. That is, women are less likely to reapply relative to men. Now, if this is the case, then for every company that rejects both men and women, when they have a subsequent job post, the number of women applying will continuously and slowly decline, leading to fewer women in the applicant pool, leading to gender gaps in hiring. Therefore, we wanted to examine whether there could be certain content of rejection messages that increases women's reapplications or their job search persistence. Okay, so now we focused on rejection messages. Why did we focus on messaging? Because messaging matters. We know from previous work that women's propensity to reapply for jobs is lower when the job is described as competitive. So when the job ad indicates that your pay depends on relative performance, then women are less likely to apply. We also know that job ads are less appealing to women when the wording elicited male stereotypes, masculine stereotypes. So if the job ad used words like competitive versus cooperative, if it described the group as dominant versus a community, and if it described the development of leadership versus interpersonal skills. I'm also going to point to another interesting study about messaging in job advertisements. And this is a field experiment done by Laura G. on LinkedIn in collaboration with LinkedIn. And here what they did is they randomly showed for job ads. So some people saw the job ad with a number of other people who had already applied, and other people saw the same job ad, but it didn't have the number of people who had already applied. And what they found is when the number of people who had already applied was visible, women were more likely to apply to those jobs. And Laura attributes this to the reduction of ambiguity, because women tend to be more sensitive to ambiguity, and when you reduce ambiguity, they were more likely to apply. So there's two things I want you to take away from this slide. Firstly, that messaging matters. And the second thing is I want you to keep in mind the sensitivity to competition, competitive environments, as well as sensitivity to ambiguity, which I'm going to get back to in a little bit. Okay, so what do we know about rejection communications? We know that they typically begin with a personalized salutation followed by a friendly statement like, "Thank you for applying." After this, they may or may not provide a reason for rejection. And if they do provide a reason for rejection, it falls into one of two buckets. Either it's a fit related message or a quality related message. So, what do these two messages look like? So, fit related messages typically asserted that there were no suitable openings for you, not enough fit between you and the position, other applicants were better fits. And what do quality related rejection messages look like? Uh, they typically refer to the quality of the applicant or the applicant pool. Now, each of these different messages, whether they don't provide a reason for rejection or whether they attribute the rejection to quality of fit, communicate different types of information to the candidate and thus has an implication for their behavior, that is, for their reapplication. Uh, so, what types of information do each of these messages communicate to the candidate? And in particular, how do we expect women to respond to these messages? So, let's talk about each of the three types of messages. First, the quality related message. Now, quality related rejection messages stem from an assessment of the alignment or the congruence between the candidate, that is, the skills of the candidate, and the skills required for the job. And when a rejection message cites the superior qualifications of other candidates or other applicants, it emphasizes the comparison between the skills of the candidate and the skills of others in the applicant pool. Okay? And thus it frames a rejection in competitive terms and the receiver views this as a personal loss or failing on the dimension of quality. And they also perceive that the employer fosters a competitive environment. And we know that women are less likely to engage with employers who emphasize competition or competitive dynamics in the workplace. And therefore, we expect that they will respond less positively to quality-related rejection messages. Now, let's talk about fit-related rejection messages. These messages stem from an assessment of the applicant's congruence between organizational attributes. So, congruence between the candidate and the organizational attributes, such as values, personal traits, and the work environment. So, what do I mean by each of these? So, values are the candidate's values aligned with the organization's values? Personality traits, what are the personality traits of an ideal, successful employee of this organization relative to the personality traits of that particular applicant? And finally, a work environment refers to an assessment of the comparison of the ideal work environment that the candidate wants and the work environment that the organization offers. Now, when a rejection message cites that other candidates were better or closer matches for the position, it attributes the decision to perceived incompatibility between the candidate and the organization. And it draws less attention to the personal deficiencies of the candidate being rejected. And these messages are considered to be socially preferred and more face-saving. So, how do women respond to such messages? They prefer non-competitive settings. Fit messages are relational and avoid emphasizing a competitive environment. So, we expect women to respond more positively to such messages. Now, the last type of rejection message, which is a no reason message, these messages don't provide a reason. They're ambiguous, less transparent, and leave room for speculation. Okay. Now, ambiguity may also be perceived as a failure of the employer to provide assurance that their application has been treated fairly. And they may be therefore perceived, these messages, the employer may be perceived as being less informationally just. Okay. These informational justice refers to the lack of being able to convey information about why outcomes are distributed in a certain fashion. In summary, these no reason messages are ambiguous and may be perceived to be less informationally just. Now, what do we know about how women may perceive these messages? Women are more sensitive to ambiguity, we know from the G study, and place more emphasis on informational justice. Therefore, we expect that women will respond more negatively to such messages, that is, messages that don't have a reason. So, these arguments lead to our two hypotheses, which are that rejected women will respond more positively to the fit message relative to the quality message, and similarly more positively to the fit message relative to the no reason message. Okay, so in terms of method, we conducted a randomized control trial at Teamlease, which is a staffing company. Employers, the particular employers that we considered, the particular employees that we considered were on Teamlease's payroll. So this was not a placement agency, it's a staffing company. Company is obviously publicly traded with over 3,000 client companies. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the jobs in our sample. Our sample included close to 300 different job roles in a wide variety of fields. These were primarily sales, customer support, and office support. The job listing spanned over 200 cities. Each worker was hired for a particular job at the client organization, and then they ended up staying at this client organization for 6 months to a year, after which they may be placed at a different client organization, or some of them got hired by the client organization directly. Okay. So now let me tell you a little bit about the candidates or the subjects in our experiment. We had over 8,500 candidates who were rejected over a 6-month period. Now, 31% of these come from the 6 largest metros. They were mostly male, 81% were male, and most of them were aged between 20 and 35 years old. Okay, in terms of process, that is, how does hiring occur for this particular sample? So the staffing agency posts available positions on their web portal. Candidates view these available positions, they apply. There's some information that's required and some that's optional. What is required is name, phone number, formal education. What is optional is gender, age, marital status, work experience, and job and city preference. Okay, so once they apply, what happens? The recruiters at the staffing company screen the applicants. So just based on the information that's provided on the portal, if some of these are selected, some of these candidates are selected, they move on to the next stage of an interview. And if they're shortlisted beyond the interview by the staffing company, then they're interviewed by the client organization, and then they come on the payroll of the staffing company. Okay, so experiment. We randomly assigned over 26 weekly cohorts, that is over 6 months. We randomly assigned all the rejected candidates. Each week they sent us a pool of rejected candidates. We took them, we randomly assigned them to 3 buckets, and we sent back these 3 buckets to the company, and then every week they would send out one of the 3 rejection messages based on the condition they were assigned to. Okay, and our random assignment allows us to causally test our hypothesis. This experiment occurs in people's naturally occurring environment. Therefore, there's a high degree of realism rather than doing this in a lab. And the candidates were unaware that they were part of a study, so there's no actor-observer bias. Okay, so what did the messages look like? I'm going to start out with a no reason related rejection message. And this one starts out by saying, thank you for applying to such and such role at this company in this division. We are sorry we cannot make you an offer at this time. Please apply to other positions by clicking such and such URL. So that's a no reason message. Now, the fit related message looked exactly the same, except we inserted one little sentence after the thank you sentence. This sentence said, candidates selected were closer matches for the position. Okay, so this referred to the fit between the organization and the candidate. And everything else about the message was the same. And the third type of message was a quality related rejection message, where after the thank you sentence, we inserted a sentence that said, candidates selected were better qualified for the position. Okay, so this referred to the quality of the applicant. So now our rejection messages were sent out by text or SMS. And the reason SMS was used is that it's used by over 60% of recruiters. And the reason they use SMS is that there's a greater open rate, faster response time, and such messages are more discreet in nature. And our findings are likely to generalize to rejection messages sent via email as well, unlikely to generalize to messages sent, the rejections communicated by phone, just because there's less standardization in phone communications of rejection. There's differences in voice inflection of the communicator, and there could be potential delays in communicating the rejection. Okay, so our main outcome was reapplications within 8 weeks after rejection. So did they apply back to this company within 8 weeks after rejection to another job? Okay. So why do we select 8 weeks? Where did that come from? So within a 4-week period, 10.6% of any candidate that was rejected reapplies. And within 8 weeks, it's 11.77%. And if we wait another 4 weeks, it barely increases. It increases to 11.97%. So after 8 weeks, we don't really see much of movement in reapplications. Okay, so we picked this 8-week window. Experiment started in Feb 2020. So we had 6 months, that is 26 weekly cohorts of rejected candidates. And then because we observed reapplications 8 weeks after, we had another 8 weeks, total of 34 weeks for our study. Now, as a standard practice, we check to see if our rejected applicants are identical or at least statistically equivalent on observable characteristics, and they are on a wide variety of observable characteristics, such as their gender, whether they're married, their age. So, marriage and age are optional fields, but when they do fill it up, we have that data. Whether they come from a top metro, whether they list preferences, and so forth. Okay, so our results, I'm going to show them graphically, no equations here. Okay, so here we have the likelihood that women are going to reapply after receiving each of the messages. And as you can see from this top bar here, that women who received the fit-related message were significantly more likely to reapply than women who received the other two messages. And here I have the reapplication for men. And we find that there's really no difference in reapplication for men. So it's pretty much hovers around the same number. The fit message also seems to close the gender gap in reapplications, right? So because when you receive a fit message, your likelihood to reapply is that, and very similar to men receiving any of the other 3 messages, while the other 2 messages are associated with sharp gender differences in reapplications. Okay, so that's the results of our regression model, which I'm going to skip over. In terms of contribution, so what do we know from previous work? We know that women are likely to apply to jobs when they meet most of the job criteria. So whatever the job lists as criteria, if they meet most of the criteria, they're likely to apply, while men tend to apply when they meet about 60% of the criteria. Now, this is not a study. This is based on a survey that was published in HBR, but it's widely cited. And the idea here is that women are more purposeful when they apply, so they're really careful that they're meeting all the criteria. And hence, they're going to respond to rejection very differently from the way men respond if they're just applying, if they meet about 60% of the criteria. Okay. We also know that women are less likely to self-promote themselves in recruitment settings and are less likely to reapply in the same context, in particular to the same firm after rejection. Our study shows that women's likelihood of applying after job rejection depends on the rejection message. We provide an insight into a possible source for the leaky pipeline for women in the workforce. And that new source is the content of rejection messages. And for practice, we provide an easy intervention to help increase the pool of female applicants. Obviously, we are not advocating that every time you use a fit-related message, even if it's not applicable, but to the extent that that is true, or instead of using a no-reason message, if it's actually true that it's a fit-related message, then that would be preferred to a no reason related message, because it's going to increase the gender diversity of your applicant pool. So with that, I'm going to end, and I welcome any questions you have. Bhagwan, thank you.
I have a suggestion for Manish, especially, and for you. Colleges do this very well. Instead of saying you're rejected, you can send a message saying you're waitlisted. Try it. You'll see a great difference. Say you're waitlisted, and if you get another job, please call us and check with us whether we have an offer for you.
So I'm just curious. I mean, there is this paper in finance called the Lehman Sisters hypothesis. Have you heard about it?
Not familiar with this.
So the argument that they make is, if Lehman Brothers was not Lehman Brothers but Lehman Sisters, would the company still have collapsed? Right? And the argument that they make is yes, because women that self-select into finance are very much like the men in finance. Right? So I think the point I'm trying to make is, just we start with this assumption, or this observation, that women are less likely to apply for jobs and they are more likely to be more discerning in terms of how they apply. That may not be completely true in jobs that require a great deal of training, that require a great deal of preparation. Like, so for instance, there's a paper looking at expert athletes, like professional athletes, and women professional athletes do not in any way hold back relative to professional men. So just that, so there might be a way to say, okay, this notion of how you message, does gender make a difference at all levels of competitive dynamics, or is there something there? So at the higher end, where you're really talking about, highly competitive jobs, maybe gender doesn't make a difference.
The paper that I cite, where women don't reapply in the same context, that's for executive jobs. So that's shown in previous work that they don't reapply. Ours are not executive jobs. And while this doesn't entirely answer your question, but like you, our reviewers have a lot of questions. And we've done a whole bunch of heterogeneity analysis. So male type jobs. So within our sample, while it's mainly, sales, customer support, and office support, we do have different other jobs as well. So we looked at male type job versus female type jobs. It still holds. We look at more competitive jobs versus less competitive jobs. The result still holds. So, yeah.
We use this, whether if let's say 12% of people are reapplying in 3 months, it's quite likely that they were in a job already and they are just prepping for using this as a way to figure out new jobs for themselves. If this number 12% moves down to 8% or goes up to 16%, does that give us some information about the employment situation in the country? Is that a way to think about it at all? I know it doesn't concern the paper specifically, but I'm just trying to make use of some alternate data to try and get a sense of the labor market.
See, the only thing is that you had said that this implies that they were already in a job, they're looking to move to another. I mean, how do we know that, right? We don't know that.
Otherwise, they would have reapplied immediately if they were looking for a job?
They had to be the right job too, right? Or they have been waiting for, something else. So we can't reach that conclusion. Okay. I don't know. It would be a stretch, I think, for me to assume that, they were not employed, or they were already employed, is what you said, right? Either way, I wouldn't know from the sample.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, from a practitioner's point of view. I think you published this paper in 2002 or 3.
No, it's we are just about to submit our revision. It's a revise and resubmit.
Have you done some sharing of this in some conferences with the practitioners of HR people and so on and so forth? Did you see any kind of response, agreement, disagreement?
So I've not seen any disagreement. If they had disagreement, they didn't say it to me. And I've not. Yeah, I presented a few times and it's been received fine. Like, there's never been like, okay, that doesn't make sense. But I'm open to people in this room. Like, what do you all think? Because you all are practitioners, right? Like, what is the response here? What do you think about, about using different rejection communications for the practitioners here?
No, I'm just thinking about the norms, right? Like, if people ghost them, a lot of my students say these days when they apply to tech jobs, they don't hear back at all, right? Like, so getting something is always better than nothing, and then something better is marginally better than something, right? Like, so I wonder what is the norm usually in these areas for
Yeah. So when we spoke to the company, their norm was it depended on the recruiter. So each recruiter handled it differently. They got back to the candidates whenever they wanted to. They communicated the rejections in different ways. So there was not a standardized. So our reviewers again wanted us to compare it to the standardized baseline, but there wasn't such a standardized baseline. But at least what we can say from this is, if you were to choose from one of these three, which are the most common rejection messages ever used? That we have previous research that says what are the three common rejection messages? No reason, fit, and quality are the most common ones used. And of these three most common ones, use the fit-related message. Anindu.
Just to quickly piggyback on this line of questioning, I wonder if it's feasible to actually study the potential for the recruiters to have any bias in sending these messages. So if it's a male recruiter versus female recruiter, are female recruiters more likely to adopt what you're suggesting as opposed to male recruiters? And if you don't find an effect, that's great. But if you do find an effect, then it's meaningful, because then it's saying something that male recruiters may be less willing to adapt.
Oh, it was sent out through their system. It was it was just loaded into the
Yeah,
system.
no, I'm talking about a next sort of an extension. So yeah, a different study. Yeah.
Yeah. So who would adopt it, right? That's
Is there any bias at the gender level, at the recruiter level, in adopting this intervention?
Yeah, that would be interesting to examine to the extent that one can get such data at scale, right?
Manish can get everything. So
Maybe in future, a lot of this is going to be handled by AI itself. Whether it may not be even programmed, might be his own common sense, his own intelligence that is helping. Probably we'll have to do a study on how they are doing. Anyway, I think time is getting. I'm very interested to hear you, Jonathan, because you're talking about alternate data sources, and in the subject area that we are talking about, we practically have very limited longitudinal data. So in AI and all those things are happening so fast. So only people like you. Yeah. Now, people like you are, otherwise, like a true researcher would like to have a reasonable longitudinal data to work on. But unfortunately, that's not there. Then that's the next best alternative is to use as powerful tools like probably you're going to, share with us. Thank you.
I will be talking about a series of papers, some of which I published along with a long list of co-authors. And these are things that I think are really relevant when we're thinking about, well, what are we going to do once we've integrated these AI and DPI systems? So, let's start from this idea of, we're building state capacity. I think when we're thinking about state capacity, we're often thinking about three questions. Like, who are the vulnerable people that we're trying to identify? Where are the poor? Where are the exposed? Who are the people who are unreached by traditional methods or markets? And then what is the need that they're trying to meet? What are the risks that they're facing? Which are the ones that are, maybe facing environmental shocks or economic shocks of some sorts? And then, assuming we did some intervention, did that intervention, that policy, did it work? And I'm going to surmise, I think, I don't think this is super controversial. I think economists do the third thing really well. And I think we do the first and the second thing really poorly. Ananya agrees with me. This is great. I won Ananya over. This is great. Where I think DPI, and I'm going to call this open data, because what I really think distinguishes DPI is that it's open by default. So maybe there's an API that's available that people can access, and you can use this in order to do number one and number two really well. So I'm going to try to convince you of that and show you some other things that are possible with that. Now, let's think about number one. What's really hard is, so one question the state might want to know is, where are poor people and where are they located? Now, a statistic that I find really alarming is that multilateral organizations say we should measure every 3 years within a country the poverty rate of the people. And between 2002 and 2011, 57 countries only measure their poverty rate either 0 or 1 time. And you can see that the areas, oh, I'm going the wrong direction. You can see that the areas where we want to know about poverty the most, we have the fewest amount of data points. And I think that should be, alarming, saying that the traditional methods that we're doing, the surveying methodology, is just not up to the task, especially given the rate of change, everything else. Surveys are not sufficient to do this. And if you've actually conducted one of these surveys, you understand why it's so hard to do this. This is what a traditional survey looks like in the areas where you want to know about poverty. It's still done by hand. It's still done interpersonally. These surveys are great for certain kind of questions. We can get really deep. We can really understand this kind of question, right? But a lot of times, the survey questions, I read all these surveys, and often the questions are super highly correlated, right? When you know one answer, are they unemployed? Are they facing some kind of shock? You know everything, right? So maybe you don't need to go into this amount of depth for everything, because you can understand enough to change the economic situation in the household just by knowing a few things. So using these surveys, they have some advantages, but they're too infrequent, they're too expensive, and they're imprecise. Doing any of these surveys are going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. A lot of times they're performed 3 to 5 years at best, and they're pretty reliable in certain areas. The way that they do the sampling is they'll oversample some areas and not even sample other areas. So as a whole, we're just not learning enough about the world with the precision, the frequency that we need to, especially when you consider all the changes that are going on. So I like to think of state capacity as fundamentally an information problem. The government is going to fail when it cannot observe the populations, when it can't predict shocks, and when it can't deliver those services given those features. And so the framework that I like to think about is how do we perceive? So are we perceiving where the vulnerable are at? Can we predict, what shocks they're going to face? And what are the interventions? How can we act in accordance with this? And I'd like to convince you that to do this, the data have to be open. Because if the data aren't open, then we can't really predict on the basis of that. We're going to be too late in building those resilient systems. And these insights have to be continuous, right? If they're not continuous, then you're not going to be able to act in real time when the threat is really present. And these actions have to be automatic, because you don't want to wait for the government to make a decision about these things. They frequently don't act quick enough. And maybe another way to think about this is that the DPI, the open data, is going to be a perception layer, and the AI is going to be the action layer on top of that. Okay, so now this is taken from some of my work. This is work that we did in Mexico. And we're looking at 2 areas of Mexico using satellite imagery. I use a ton of satellite imagery because I think it solves the open problem pretty well. Satellites travel all over the globe. They're constantly capturing things. And as long as you can access the sensor, you can observe what they observe. Okay, so one area is poor, one area is rich. And you can immediately see with your own eyes the rich and the poor areas, even if they weren't labeled. So what are the characteristics of the rich areas versus the poor areas? Yeah. So more trees are pretty much always correlated with, especially in urban areas, are correlated with wealthier areas. The poor areas, more irregular buildings, right? It's like, this is almost universal. Find me a place in an urban area that doesn't have those characteristics. The thing that I've learned with satellite imagery is that if you can see it with your eyes, you can certainly build a model that can detect these kind of things. So, you can additionally do things like you can extract out features from these satellite images. So this is from an example in Sri Lanka, where we took the satellite images, high resolution satellite imagery that had 30, 50 centimeter resolution. From those images, you can extract out meaningful features, like here we're extracting out buildings, you can extract out crop types, you can extract out even the roof types. And this is a perception layer that we can start to act on this, right? So what do we do with this in this paper? Well, we wanted to build a poverty model using all these different extracted features from the satellite imagery. And so we did things like extract out roof type, the buildings, and we actually could even identify cars from the satellites using pretty basic convolutional neural networks. We threw all these through a pretty standard machine learning model, an artificial intelligence model, if you prefer, and we're able to predict the poverty rate of that area, even in an out of sample area, meaning we have identified features that were predictive of the poverty rates. And so, it's hard to tell. One of those is the true poverty rate. The other one is the predicted poverty rate. And it's hard to tell which is which. So we're able to get a pretty close approximation of that. And certainly, if you think about rank ordering your priorities of which areas do you want to address first, we're certainly doing a pretty good job there. All right, so those are using kind of standard satellite imagery, high resolution satellite imagery that are super expensive. There's a company called Planet, which operates hundreds of microsatellites that are up in orbit right now. The satellites are the size of like a bread box, and they're in geosynchronous orbit. So every day they're capturing all of the Earth's landmass. It's incredible what these things are able to do. And so when we're thinking about surveys only being accessed every 3 years or 5 years, like what can we do with satellites that are tracking all the Earth's landmass every day, right? Well, we could do a lot of things. This is some work that we did in Mexico, where we took that same imagery from that satellite, and we said, well, can we measure the roads? And so we were able to identify with pretty high accuracy where are the areas within the satellite that have roads. We're also able to track which areas have buildings. You can immediately see those from the satellite. And so if you wanted to say like, okay, here's the changes in roads over time, that's something you would do with this kind of imagery. Now, I know the Planet people really well. They love working with governments. They love working with researchers. They're a for-profit company, but they want to be the kind of infrastructure for this type of work. So, they like for anything for humanitarian purposes, they either give free data or super reduced rate. And you can do really cool things like this. Like this is a map of every road in Mexico that's been identified from satellite imagery. And I think, there's some people from the World Bank who work in transportation here. Yeah, this is pretty cool, huh? Have you seen this? Yeah. Oh, okay, all right. But, for our purposes, the things we're really interested in is, can we build a model of poverty using all these features and all these satellites, using a fancy machine learning model called a convolutional neural network. And this was really the first of its time, where you had poverty going in, a bunch of features in a very complex model, and then you were predicting poverty on the outside. So it was pretty cool work at the time. And the predictive power that you have from this is actually, certainly above the level that you would expect for policy usefulness. Roughly got about a 0.6 R squared. Okay. So other researchers have also noticed the gap within the lack of welfare data. Josh Blumenstock is one of these researchers. He's over at Berkeley, along with some co-authors and actually with some power from Meta. So he had some GPUs from Meta. He built an asset index using satellite imagery, covering pretty much everywhere in the world that you want to know where poor people are located. Now, asset index, it basically measures how many assets are available within a household. And the really cool thing that they did was they released this for free. So right now you can go to their public GitHub. You can download these. This is at Bing tile resolution. Microsoft has its own like Google Maps, and so it's at a 2.4 meter grid, and you can download this. And this gives you a pretty good first approximation of where are the poor areas within a country and where are the relatively more wealthy areas. I've used this data everywhere. The thing I really like about this is that there's an API. It's open, so you can drag the stuff and use it within whatever kind of pipeline that you're thinking about. The one disadvantage of this is that it's for a static time period. So we're not really measuring changes in welfare over time using this data, but its advantage here is that it's has global breadth. And I think like this is a really good model of how do for-profit companies work in the humanitarian era where they want to provide this type of digital public goods. Some of you might have heard of using nighttime lights. You've seen like that map of North Korea versus South Korea. And so nighttime lights are used all the time within research of saying like, here are the rich areas, here are the poor areas. What's really fascinating is that something like transaction data from payments, like from this PhonePe Pulse data, that has 5 times the variation of nighttime lights data. And think of how many papers are using nighttime lights, and how much more we can understand of the world if more people were able to produce this kind of work using, the high resolution transaction payments data. So I think this is a really good model of saying like, this data has a lot of use, and we should be, promoting this and encouraging companies to provide this type of digital public goods. Okay, shifting focus a little bit. Another thing we thought of, well, we've covered poverty, but are there other things we can measure, like say bombing damage? So this is a satellite image. Just pulled this up in Google Maps, some time ago from a city in Syria. And if there's a Syrian civil war, and so from that civil war, there was a series of bombing damage, and you could pretty clearly notice these areas that were bombed. And so what we did was we said, well, is there a way that we could build some kind of convolutional neural network or some kind of AI model that could recognize bombing damage? And so we had some really good annotations. In yellow, you can see the annotations of this is actual bombing damage. In red, we had our model identified destruction. And so we're able to build out with pretty degree of accuracy, not just an area and understanding of where places in Syria have been bombed, but a whole timeline of understanding, from the beginning of the Civil War to the end of the Civil War, what areas have been bombed. And these types of models, and in particular, this model has been used in post-conflict reconstruction all over the world. So this is Aleppo, and you can really see with this resolution, the areas, anything in red has positively identified bombing damage. Okay, so we've talked a lot about who's poor, but that's really a static measure of things. Now, the thing I want to think about is how can we marry that with a more dynamic understanding of the world? Like, who is vulnerable here when a shock hits? And so, we think about a flood, think about like a, heat stroke or like some sort of crop failure. Can we marry these seeing systems with some sort of reactive system that identifies the shock and then has some response to that? So this is some work that I'm doing with some colleagues at the World Bank in Benin. They're working on a social protection system. And that social protection system is, let's identify poor people, let's transfer some money to them. And in Benin in particular, you have to worry about flood vulnerability. There's some areas that have, a high degree of flooding. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to identify those places and either give them money in advance of a shock, or when we know that there's some type of shock that's occurring, we can, give them a lot more money. And so we've built here what we call a flood vulnerability index, where we're trying to measure, which are the areas that are most at risk for flood vulnerability. And, since we have to have an equation in every talk, very simple equation. It's a linear combination. What we're thinking about this hazard risk, which is the historical flood risk of the area. The exposure is really like the housing material. So you can observe, as a household, does it have, good quality housing? Does it have bad quality housing? So that's part of it. And then the vulnerability, right? So what is their poverty level? We think all these things lead towards the vulnerability of the household itself. So this FVI is the flood vulnerability index. It turns out that this flood vulnerability index is super highly correlated with poverty. And you have to think about like how much worse is it? It's bad to be in a flood. It's bad to be in poverty. It's even worse when you're poor and in a flooding situation. So we really want to address those are the households that are probably most critically to address. So with this poverty transfer program, you can see the individuals, the households that are below the poverty line, if we can give those households more money, they'd rise above the poverty line. But in particular, if you think about what is that vulnerability that you have to flood, can you also give some extra money for those individuals who happen to be both poor and at risk for flooding? Okay. Now, turning this back to India, I think one of the amazing things is that so much of the digital infrastructure has already been built. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here. You have the digital payment rails. You have the identification system that is here. You have all the government records here. You have the engineering talent. So all the things are in place in here in order to build those adaptive systems. And so I just want to give you an example of something that might work like that. It's really hot outside. It's crazy hot, but imagine if you didn't have access to air conditioning, right? So what would an adaptive system for heat stress look like? Well, you'd want to be able to map out the risks. The first step here is saying like, well, which are the areas that have extreme heat stress? So you want to build that map, hopefully using open data. And this is where DPI comes in handy. You want to cross this with social registries. So having some way to automatically bridge that information with the social registries so you can figure out, okay, who is facing heat stress as well as being poor. And now you need some sort of trigger function that says, well, those households are facing that heat stress. And you can measure that using either satellites, there's different indicators. And then really the last mile is like, what action is the state going to take when they know that those heat stress is occurring and those individuals are at risk? And really, like, I'm a researcher, I love writing papers that, publish well in a journal, but you have to change your order of thinking, which is that, like, if you write a really good paper and nobody acts on it, then have you really done any good here? Like, it has to reach the screens of somebody who is in a position to take an action. So maybe the best thing you can do is not write a paper, but build a dashboard. Or maybe, you can build some sort of automatic system that informs some kind of state action. Okay, this all sounds great, right? Like, everyone's on board. I'm preaching to the choir. We have that expression here? I don't know. Okay. So why aren't we doing this? I will say, I think the biggest impediment here is training. I think we've all been trained in a certain way, especially government workers are trained in a certain way, and they're just not used to integrating these different data series. And so I really think if I were going to say doing one thing, I would train a whole cadre of government workers around looking more like startup workers, where they're mashing together a bunch of data, they're throwing stuff on, they're being careful about privacy, but they're also, moving fast and breaking things. Hopefully not breaking things. I think using open data, using DPI should be the default. There are some questions you don't need it, but tell me a story whereby, because anytime you're not using these things, it's just going to take months to get permission from the data. And anytime I am engaged in a project, I'm just assuming I'm not going to get the data that they always promise. And I usually never get that data. I think you want to encourage private enterprises to make that DPI. They have such great sources of data, and you have to encourage them to release that. And if you encourage them to build data standards on top of that data. And I think you have to change your kind of framework. You have to have a tolerance for imperfect solutions that are quick, which is really hard to do for the government, because the government, it's a hard job because you're going to get criticized for everything that you do, and you will get praised for very little of the good stuff that you do. So you tend to be really risk averse. I think we have to tolerate a little bit of that from all of our public servants. And then the best way to approach is this pilot, then scale. So pilot something and scale it up. And that's kind of the best way to proceed forward. Okay. All right. Comments and questions? Happy to take some questions. Okay. Yeah.
So
Thank you.
right.
Yeah.
So very interesting. I love the body of work that you presented. I guess in the spirit of the fact that every machine learning model will have some limitations. In your experience, what has been maybe the biggest source of false positives or false negatives,
Yeah.
like missed signals, and what have you done to address them?
Yeah.
That's the first question. And maybe the second one, a quick one, is perhaps you are getting at this, which is beyond prediction, could some of this be used to actually formulate an early warning system, right? Because I can see the applications, and I think it should be very well received. I wonder if you've thought about it, and if not, why not? If so, why haven't you done it yet?
Yeah, I think I think to develop an early warning system, you have to be really good at like nowcasting. Have that, you have to be really good at like having your data throughput. So I think it's like one step at the time, right? It's like, are you steering the ship kind of in the moment, or are you steering the ship understanding it like where we're going to be 2 weeks from now, right? So like forecasting is definitely the goal, but the first step is just understanding like what's happening on the ground right now. And in a lot of places, like your data are 5 years outdated. So and then your first question was about like what is the brittleness of the different models. I think one thing that's true about the old generation of machine learning models is that they tend to overfit. We're not learning general features. What's so exciting about generative AI is that that's a whole class of methodology where we can learn generalized features. So, I'm using CNNs. Those CNNs tend to work really well within context, not predict so great out of sample. But the whole class of generative AI vision models actually do that. So I'm hoping that those have solved that, but I haven't really tested that. Yeah.
John has a question.
Can I just add on to that one?
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah.
One of the things that has always worried me about the nightlights data is that it doesn't take into account population density.
Yeah.
So in Delhi, Jorbagh will have very little nightlight, and some of the slums would have a lot more nightlight. So how much work there has been on ground truthing some of these estimates?
Yeah.
Same thing would apply to PhonePe actually, because again, the population density would make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you should be using nightlights. Like I think you should be using other types of data. The reason that people use it is because it's global scale and it measures changes over time, right? I think data are always relative to whatever your other use case is, right? In terms of ground truthing, the standard thing we do within machine learning is we have like a withheld sample that we use as a test. And so I'm generally presenting my test results here. I think most of what I presented here were my test results, but that's not a true out of distribution sample. And I think, it would be great to kind of do a full test distribution. But in the Syria example, we were extremely careful about what is our out of sample validation. We didn't go on the ground then and measure that, but I think that would be a really interesting step.
Quick point about the heat stress example,
Yeah.
right? So apparently in Delhi, they're already doing it. So the Indian government is looking at the sensor and also at basically the kind of the roof in each of these homes.
Oh, cool.
So if there are like tin roofs, it would be that much more hotter inside a house compared to let's say a different kind of house.
Yeah.
And then they are planning local interventions about like, okay, should you get a holiday, or all schools should be declared holidays, or should I be distributing water bottles at these areas, that kind of thing, which I thought was amazing. And, just to say that, it works.
Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't know that. I think what I would suggest is like integrating that with the social registry system, right? Because then you have not only the indicator of the stress, but also like an understanding of like the underlying conditions in the household. But that's really cool. And seen that. Yeah.
I've drunk your Kool-Aid completely.
Thank you. Yeah.
No, but I have a paper which came out in PNAS Nexus last week on
Gaza. Wonderful.
On estimating the economic impact of what's happened in Gaza since October 7th.
Yeah.
Using NTL, using Sentinel satellite for the ground destruction, basically. And then to come back to the point that was made earlier, using household surveys, poverty mapping using household surveys, and the 2017 census then to establish basically an exchange rate between NTL intensity and household expenditure.
Oh, cool.
At the pixel level.
Okay.
But the one constraint that I see to this sort of thing, and that includes the meta asset index. So the meta asset index is dependent upon DHS, and DHS no longer exists. And a lot of these things are completely we are still dependent upon an injection of public funds. And when USAID got canceled, so did DHS. So the meta stuff is no one's going to be able to do that in the future, except if someone picks up the slack, and no one is. And also to have stuff on the ground where you actually and compare what you get, whether it's daytime satellite data or NTL or whatever, you're still dependent on there's still a public good component to this, which is actual survey work and census work, also if you want to do poverty mapping.
I mean, I agree the necessity of doing census work. I'm not saying, but don't you feel like, so if the DHS goes away, don't you think that we need more substitutes for that? And like DPI, even provided by the private sector, can substitute for that. Like the questions are too important to rely solely on any one source of data. Oh, we agree. Okay, great. We'll disagree on other things, I'm sure.
John, I agree with you. But again, looking at this, one good thing, DPI and these kind of things is a wider adoption. There's a lot of digital exhaust that is coming.
Yeah.
And that digital exhaust may be able to give you some directional input. And the quality of the models as well as the quality of the...
Not in Gaza, I can tell you. Not much DPI exhaust in Gaza.
Yeah, I know. I agree. See, that is whatever. But on a broader scale, even countries like India, even many parts of Africa, etc. So the good thing is that if it is it gets developed, as well as if it is tested to look at how Madam has said about the ground truth testing has been done. So that sort of helped them in their models in future. So it's like a journey, but it's good to see some good stuff happening. And now I think Amit, you're already setting up.
No, go ahead.
Good. The thing is, you're talking about live streaming. So we are keen to listen to you. Over to you.
Well, so let me start by saying thank you, Ravi, thank you, Saurabh, thank you, Manish, for arranging this wonderful conference. Really enjoying here, and thank you for the opportunity to present. This work is co-authored with Sofia. She's at George Mason, and with Siddharth Sharma, who is at Indiana University. So there are two elements to this work. One is live stream e-commerce, which is really a new channel of commerce. And I'm going to have a few words about that. And maybe at the end, we'll talk about its future in India. And the second element of this is how AI is being used in the context of this new channel of live commerce. So let's get started by talking about what is live stream shopping. And I'm saying this because many of us may not actually have done live stream shopping. You are smiling, Uttara. I don't know, maybe you have. So, well, what is live stream shopping? I am showing you two examples over there. One is China, the other one is US. But the idea is this: you have an interface where there is a presenter, and the presenter is presenting a series of products in quick succession, one after the other, right? So few minutes to each product. So in a live stream, which might be 4 hours long, 6 hours long, people may end up presenting up to 100 products, right? So that's kind of the idea. Now, what is special about this channel? What's different? You can see, of course, there's a lot of dynamics involved, right? And these presenters who are presenting are typically large influencers with a lot of fan following, right? And they know how to be, they are showmen, show persons. They are actually doing a very good job of making it very alive, right? So that's kind of one aspect of it. It's entertainment, and the other part is information, right? When people are committing money, they are buying, right? So they want information about what product actually suits them, suits their needs, right? So they may want to ask questions. And in a setting where in a live stream, there may be hundreds of thousands of people attending a live stream at one point of time, how does that get done efficiently, right? So that's where the AI element will also come in later. But for now, these presenters actually are supported by a team of humans who are actually answering these questions. These questions are scrolling on the screen so that everyone can see what is being asked. And there's a social aspect to it. People can chat with each other. So there's a lot of, information availability, right? And then the purchasing is integrated inside these video streams, right? So what happens is that, there are links available here on the interface. You click on that particular product interface and immediately buy. You're not taken to a different website to buy. So it's all integrated inside. Okay, so it's a shopping plus entertainment channel. And you know what? Gen Z loves this. This is where things are going. Now, why am I talking about live stream shopping? What is the potential for that? Look at China, right? And maybe COVID played a role, because if you look at this graph 2019, this number was very small in China as well, but look at the growth. And in 2026, this number is close to $1 trillion in sales. It's almost a quarter of e-commerce sales in China. So you can see that, of course, China is the leader in this space. So, what is the potential of this new channel is all I'm trying to say out here. Okay, moving ahead from China, and these are some big, players, Taobao and Kaishuo. Okay, US numbers are small, but they are growing. Okay, so in 2026 now the projection is about 68 billion dollars, right? So the numbers are there, they are growing, but very far away from where China is right now. And then yesterday I was looking at where is India, and India 2026 current numbers seem to be in the ballpark of about 10 billion, so much further behind US. But at least as far this report says, from this company Report Cube, is like a Gartner of the Middle East, about $200 billion US in the next 10 years or so. So it is growing. Okay. And I'll pause here to say that when I was a PhD student about 25 years back at the University of Rochester, we used to do a case with MBA students, and this was about the strength and weakness analysis of Amazon right around 2000, 2001. And we used to talk about whether Amazon's business model is going to succeed or fail. It seems almost ridiculous talking about this today, but it was a new channel at that time, selling stuff online. And today we think, at least I think, that this channel already has shown a lot of potential, that it can grow to and bring in a lot of new audience. So perhaps this channel cannot be ignored. Okay, so this is again, in India things are growing. Now let's talk about the AI element. So in China they have experimented with these AI forms that can look to be human, almost human. So you can see the example here, this is like the human selling some noodles, and this is the virtual live streamer selling noodles, right? Of course, today these virtual live streamers can be created by AI. In the time that we have the data from 21 to 22, they are more like animations. Okay, and they do similar things. They provide information and they entertain viewers, answer questions, present these products, etc. But these kind of solo live streamers are typically used in non-peak hours. 4 a.m. in the morning. In China, it's a big industry, keeps running 24 hours. Okay, but the larger use of these virtual live streamers is as assistants. So I talked about human assistants. Well, in place of human assistants, you could have virtual assistants basically, and they are powered by AI. And one of the things that they really are helpful in is in presentation, right? You can talk to an animation, a human presenter, and making a case for a product, and they can also answer a lot of questions. And as you may imagine, they don't tire, right? So they can ask questions consistently with whatever quality they are designed to be for a 5-hour live stream. So what are the trade-offs of adoption of this virtual live streamer technology? Well, as I said, lot of interaction capacity, high response quality which is consistent, but there can be some downsides to it as well. And the downsides are, first of all, people may believe they don't look like humans. And if this guy is telling me to buy a product, can I trust? So there can be trust, those kinds of things. And if this technology becomes the center of attraction, people are not thinking about the product but thinking about this and this interaction and not buying. So there can be some trade-offs over there. And so the research questions that we are looking at is, what is the impact of adopting this kind of an assistant? And as with any new technology, you worry about the fact that could there be novelty effect at play, and because of this novelty effect, could initially there might be a spike in sales, which is what you are looking at, but maybe it declines over time, right?
And so if it does decline over time, is the mechanism novelty effect, or could it be something else, right? So this could it be something else? Please think about that, and I have some interesting things to say on that, I hope. And then finally, we do observe a decline of the effectiveness of virtual live streamers. So what can be done to actually mitigate that decline? Right. So these are the main research questions. The context, the data that we have is a major Chinese live streaming platform. So that's where, so she had some good connections and she was able to get the data for us. And this is a major Chinese platform hosting many live streaming channels. Okay. And this platform introduced this virtual live streamer technology, which could be adopted by these channels. Now, each of these channels would do a large number of live streams over time. So this is how the setup is. Once this technology was made available, then there was a staggered adoption by the channels over time. So it was, as you can see where I am going with this, we will be using a staggered difference in difference to try to figure out the causal effects. One thing to note is that we did the analysis at the level of the channels. So you can see that these channels may, once they adopt the technology, they may use it for only a subset of their live streams, not for all the live streams. They have that flexibility and they choose to exercise that as well. Okay, why am I not moving? So we have data for about 72,000 live streaming sessions with about 500 major live sessions with 500 channels, and 1 year period from 21 July to 22 July. And all of these sessions have got a primary human live streamer with an assistant, which is a virtual live stream. About 67% of these sessions employ the VLS. So this is my mandatory, equation, and I think I will just flash pass it now. You have seen it, and I think I'll rather present the result with this picture. So this is what we have. This is also a relative time model. So you can see that in the pre-period there is really no trend that you can see. So you can hopefully trust the results a little bit better. And you can see that after adoption, there is a jump in sales, but it starts to decline over a period of time. So we do see this decline. Now, where is this decline coming from? We thought of course, there's the novelty effect, but there's also something which is related to the governance of AI models. And the fact that AI models in practice can get worse over time. And this phenomena is called model drift, and it was first published in a paper, I think in Scientific American, if I remember correct. Yes, Scientific American in 2023. And the idea is this, that products that are being sold in these live streams, for example, they keep changing. That selection keeps changing, and the models that are trained on the previous chat data may actually not be very relevant as the product selection changes, and maybe so the models may not do as well in answering questions as they might have done before. So there is this governance and this design issue involved, which says that these models need to be updated frequently. How frequently is that question? Okay, so if this is the case, if models are getting worse at answering questions, that might reflect in bad performance, right? So one of the things we looked at was some metrics that captured the performance of these virtual live streamers, which is average response time. So if a question is asked, how much time does it take for the model to reply to that question, or what is the length of the words that are there in an average answer, and if that word count length is increasing, it means the answers are more informative. So there's a simple metric to say that, and we saw that actually on all of these metrics over time, there's not a decline but an improvement. So it seems that these models were actually implemented properly and the governance was done nicely. So from that perspective then, it does not seem that a decline in the performance of the model itself is responsible for the decline in sales. So then, is it novelty effect? if there is novelty effect, then users' behavior would show disengagement, right? Viewers may not comment as much, right? Users may not do shares of these live streams as much, right? So we looked at those metrics, and we also looked at another metric, which is average watch duration. How long does on an average do users look at the live streams? And what we found is something, a contradiction is of some sort. Comments and shares actually increase over time. So again, users don't show disengagement on those aspects, but yet the average watch duration declines. And now when people are spending less time in the live stream, they are actually getting exposed to fewer products, and perhaps that's the reason they are buying less. So that's the suggestion that we have. And so why could this happen? Combine it with the previous slide that I was talking about, it seems that the technology is becoming better and better at answering questions more quickly and more precisely, because it's more information, each response is longer. So users are rational, they get their response to their questions and they leave. After that, they make a decision, buy or not buy, and they leave. And so there are fewer, let's say, cross-selling opportunities to there. So you can see that actually a model which is implemented in practice and doing well may actually result in users leaving early from that interface and buying less. So that is kind of an unintended consequence of a good model. So the last part really over here is that since there is a loss in sales that is involved, we have some heterogeneous effects which kind of suggests where this can go. And the idea is to, and actually Ravi is the first person who told me about this paper, which is by Jerry Tellis. I think it is published in 2019 JMR. And this paper was also on a very interesting aspect. It talked about what kind of content in ads makes ads go viral. And one of the things that this paper talks about is the fact that, the presence of cute stimuli, right? For example, puppies or horses or children, babies, actually, creates this virality in the content. So we kind of, latched onto that same idea, and we thought that what is something that we can look which may have endearing characteristics over here. And the virtual live streamer, how they look is something that we had in the data. Some of them are actually these cute mascots. So looking at those, and we wanted to analyze that, would actually users disengage less when the virtual live streamer looked this way, right? And what we found was, yes, that actually was the case. This shows that when the VLS was actually the mascot type, there is a positive effect here, which kind of mitigates that negative effect. So overall, the takeaways that we have over here is that, yes, there is a virtual live streamer seems to kick the sales up, but there is a decline that happens. Now, interestingly, the decline does not happen because of novelty effect. It does not happen because the model is performing worse. It happens because of the fact that the model is actually performing better over time, right? So users watch less and therefore they buy less. Now, it seems that when the virtual live streamer has got these endearing characteristics, that seems to hold the users back much more. In fact, one other thing I want to say in the previous slide is that now you can see that there are two columns over here, right? So we see that with the mascot, the sales go up and the average watch duration also does not go down. So you can see those are kind of happening together. So this suggests to us in terms of future research that, if the virtual live streamers can be more entertaining, this is just the nature of the interface right now. This is what we had data for. But with now AI, perhaps these interfaces, these virtual live streamers can have various different kinds of elements that can be entertaining. And so in some sense, not only the informational aspect of AI, but the entertainment aspect of AI, if strengthened along with this informational aspect may actually do a good job in holding the users back. And so there is a simultaneous development on both aspects that might be required. Now there can be different ways in this, perhaps this can be done, but that's what I'm suggesting for future research. And I guess I have got about a minute left. So the last part I was thinking about this, and unlike some of the others who in the morning were saying that they were reaching out to their co-authors to discuss, I discussed this with AI. So what are the enabling factors that are required in India to actually jumpstart this channel? And it seems to me that there are a lot of things that were in place in China but are not in place in India. One of the things about China is that super app culture, right? So you have the TikTok of the world. People go there for entertainment, but people also go there to buy stuff. So in some sense, entertainment and shopping occurs in the same app. But in India, that's not the case. There's fragmentation, right? People will go to Amazon to buy, and people will go to YouTube or Instagram for entertainment, right? So since that fragmentation is there, it's harder to actually start this live streaming shopping, because what is a natural place for live streaming shopping to get started? The place where people actually go for entertainment, right? Because this kind of a streaming is entertaining by its very nature, and then shopping is kind of embedded into it. YouTube, Instagram are not set up that way in India right now, right? So that fragmentation is basically holding. It's not that Amazon is not trying. Amazon has got Amazon Live doing this thing, right? It's not so successful yet. Perhaps because Amazon is set up to be an operational success. Once people make up their minds they want to buy something and they go to Amazon, that can be done very efficiently. But what is happening over here is not logistics. What is happening over here is demand generation. And I don't know how good Amazon is at demand generation, influencing people to actually create demand. So those are some things as far as the platform level is concerned. And this is where perhaps now I have run out of time, but the presence of UPI and the DPI infrastructure may actually help even individual sellers to, let us say, they are doing some content on Instagram, and with the help of the UPI QR codes, etc., you don't need to take the users to click on a link, go to a different website and then make a purchase. With a QR code they can make a purchase right there, right? And if you make the people go from a content video to a different website, is a big friction. You may lose them, right? So that may not be successful. This is just one example how the UPI may actually help improve the possibility of success here. But there are more ideas, and I guess we can talk about this later. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Now is the time for questions. Hey, can I ask you with one question here? When was this study done, completed or something?
So the data is from 2021 to 2022.
22.
Yeah.
Now, I was just thinking, listening to some of the presentation that were here in the morning complimenting. If you look at, there's one study which shows that when the messages have become more entertaining, okay, the response gets faster. We had a Uttara study, I think, that was there. And there was a study that was present in the morning that AI seems to be a better influencers.
Yeah.
Okay. And it don't get tired. So are we sort of expecting a significant shift in the, the whole community of influencers and into AI hostess going? And that may take away the challenge that you're seeing in the decrease in, the sales. You said some of the things that is probably worth looking at.
Yeah, so the entertaining part is of course something that I'm alluding to, and that's there can be different ways in which you can have these systems to be be more entertaining in this context, and so I mean those are the things that one needs to kind of study more. But yeah, I think there is already some evidence that goes in that direction.
Thank you. Any more questions? I think I'm sure that at the ground. Yeah, Bapna.
Just on your last point, are you imagining like I put a video on Insta and then in the next frame I put a QR code right there? That's a platform there, right?
Yeah, that becomes like
They can watch a video and then they can buy.
Yeah, through UPI. But of course, it's not only the payment friction is one problem, but there can be a lot of other kind of frictions if you think about it. One other friction is that, as a buyer, why should I trust this seller? That this seller is being able to, fulfill the transaction. Typically, these content creators specialize in being content creators. These guys are not sellers. So these guys are not sellers, and what you want is that this content creator may do a good job in presenting this content, selling Banarsi sarees from Banaras and handicrafts from Jaipur, right? And though the products that are being created are being created by these different industries in Jaipur and Banaras, right? So suppose something gets sold and from a seller in Jaipur or Banaras, but at the time of fulfillment of delivery, this guy refuses. I don't have this product in. So there are all of those kinds of frictions involved as well that need to be kind of accounted for, which is where actually I think that there is a scope for a completely new kind of companies that actually are just doing this logistical fulfillment. And they are going to be the ones going and picking up stuff from Banaras and from Jaipur and making it like, and if those sellers who are selling stuff don't do a good job and they refuse after the fact, then they should be blacklisted somehow.
But these are problems we've solved, right, Amit, with e-commerce in general.
But now these problems have been solved in the context of closed platforms. What you need is them to be solved in the context of like more open, which is where ONDC kind of architectures come in play. So, yes, Uttar.
True. Questions there.
Stuff on these things, I'm very easily influenced.
I have one convert in the audience. Yeah.
And also, when I was growing up, this used to be teleshopping network in India, right? And QVC, and now it's kind of like very influencer. I think in India, there's Meesho that's doing exactly what you're saying, right? Like, sort of like kind of not live streaming. But, no, not live streaming shopping.
We have sold our online courses on Instagram.
No, I agree. No, I agree. That's why I'm saying no. I agree Instagram does that, but Meesho does a variation of what you are talking about. I can advertise, but someone else is handling all the logistics for me. So that's kind of enabled a lot of like women in second and third tier cities to become entrepreneurs and sell saris or things that they don't have in their hand, but also like do drop shipping. Just a comment. Right.
Again, question.
A lot of digital courses he sell through Instagram. Like,
oh, nice. So
the moment you watch the current student on alumnus, and then the alumnus is on Instagram and talking about it, and suddenly you click a button, your whatever like button, the QR code lands up, your application forms lands up, all information, the brochure is downloadable on your phone, or automatically downloaded on your phone.
And this is great, but this is easier because there is no logistics of
at least there's a digital fulfillment. But the audience that we're talking about, the 18-year-olds who are looking at micro credentials, we are able to reach only through Instagram. We've been able to reach close to 2,000 people a day.
Exactly. And that's the whole
on a 1 hour stream, we're reaching about 2,000 people.
And that's why this new channel is important. That's correct.
Questions here, Bapna? No, John.
I just have a question. What determines adoption?
Sorry?
What determines adoption? Because what I'm worried about is you have channel and product fixed effects, but what if you have, adoption is a time varying decision, right? You have before and after. So if you have a correlated unobservable, which is time varying, your results could entirely be driven, right? So
that's
but that might be what's also giving you. Right.
You are absolutely correct, and and this is something not on the slides here. But the best that we could do there was we did a subsample analysis of early adopters and late adopters, and basically the same effect reappears in both of those subsamples. So therefore, we have hopefully less of a problem. Yeah.
I'm just an observation. One of the challenges that Professor was talking about Instagram. Instagram reaches across a lot of people, but as somebody pointed out earlier, is that it doesn't take any responsibility. It's not your buying agent. It's only a broadcasting agent. So the trust has to be completely coming from the seller.
Exactly.
And now with a lot more, as people are figuring out a lot more fake sellers coming.
Yes.
That is when there is a request and a requirement for whom can we trust.
Okay.
So that is kind of a cycle going down. Many of the, otherwise they are actually D2C sellers, and the proportion of D2C sellers who are not doing the right thing is sort of being increasing. Similar kind of thing is even happening in the news. In fact, now with so much of fake news and so on so coming, which is also supplied. So now I'm looking at who is a certified one. Okay, now I will rather trust the news probably coming, we're looking from Times of India, Wall Street, not from Instagram or from WhatsApp University, because the prevalence of this fake, and which is so realistic, so high, it is forcing you to still look at assurances and trust. So that may have to see a different structural change in the parties who are involved in assisting the buyer and assisting the seller. Any more questions?
Since digital is easier to sell potentially, and the securities market in India is a lot more digital, the entire equity trading or futures and options, is there a possibility here to think about that as a medium which gets, because there are a lot of financial influencers and there is an ability to connect, and if yes, then why is that not happening, let's say with a Robinhood in the US already, where again the whole idea of financial influencers in the US is also a pretty large one, because that is again a closed loop market, right?
I mean, that's a very good question. I particularly have not thought about its implementation in financial markets. It could be done, I guess. I mean, there are things like copy trading, for example. The idea of copy trading being just that there is a person or like well known, and you just copy. You follow them and you copy and you pay them some money for being able to see what they said. So there are those kinds of things, but in the context of this live stream kind of a thing, I'm not sure what is the live aspect. If you're doing copy trading, you don't have to be have a live person and talking to a live person.
Technical analysis or say
Oh, okay, I say. Okay, that way.
we can do a lot of that.
Right. And that can persuade people, which is exactly what is happening. Yeah. Possible.
Okay.
Yeah, so
I think we should.
we've just had bad this
we're running
crypto
late.
trading.
Yeah.
A lot of crypto trading happened through this, and therefore a lot of this got completely scammed. People got scammed and it got banned.
So I'm Shahnaz Ahmed. I don't have a paper, but I'll essentially be talking about an internal framework that we have developed to think about how AI governance is to be thought about. Today we've talked about the future of AI and DPI. It's an opportune moment to also perhaps think about and ask ourselves the questions: what happens when AI gets it wrong? And fortunately or unfortunately, lawyers like me will have to think about this, and that's what I'm essentially going to do. Now, this question about governance often gets reduced to two essential issues. Should we regulate AI or should we not regulate AI? And I think it's kind of reducing governance into a binary, which I don't think is what we need to ask ourselves. What essentially is the question that we need to ask ourselves is what kind of governance architecture we need across what stages of AI's life cycle, and who builds that. And this conversation is all the more important because we are seeing how governments, both even in India, are investing heavily in AI. We are also seeing cases where AI is getting integrated into critical ecosystems, systems which provide access to essential services to people. So I think this question, when you're thinking about ambition at scale, governance cannot just be an afterthought. Some people may often say that maybe governance issues are overstated. We are yet to kind of see a harm at that scale. But I think history sort of teaches us that innovation has always followed a sort of a similar arc. You have had innovation and then regulation follows, which I think is obviously the way to go about it. But I think we can't really wait for a disaster. We can't really wait for a harm to happen at that scale and then react. So I think that's how we should kind of learn from what history teaches us. And this is what today I'll be talking about what when we think about AI governance, what is it that we mean? I think it's often kind of thought about as rules, regulations. But I think the first question that perhaps we need to also think about is what values should AI governance pursue, I think. And when I think about it, it has to do with three important values. These are trust, accountability, and public interest. Now, trust, why? Because users must be able to rely on AI systems and understand how decisions are made. Without trust, adoption itself becomes a problem. And trust can be manifested in different kinds of things, which, can be explainability, auditability. These are things which we will come very soon. The second is trust, of course, is there, but what happens when AI does something wrong? Who's liable? Because AI systems or AI solutions are getting integrated in products and services, who ultimately is liable to a user, we are not sure. I'll come to some of these illustrations here. So one is trust, the second value is accountability. So you protect the users through these values. But as I said, as and more, you have AI solutions getting integrated into, let's say, DPIs, or you have AI systems getting integrated into financial systems which provide access to critical services or essential services for communities, into healthcare. What happens when there is a disaster? So public interest has to be an important criteria when we are developing AI systems. And this essentially means that how do we train these AI models becomes very important. Just to kind of give an example that, let's say that an illustration, you have a pensioner who essentially receives a notice saying that, the pension has not been processed to his account because it's probably a duplicate account. And when he goes to the district office, it is essentially said that, okay, these figures come from a finance department. And the finance department says that, oh, there seems to be some data entry record error here. And the vendor who actually did all of this we no longer had the contract here. Now, who is to be held liable for it? I think there are laws, but the answer is not as clear as it should be. Similarly, let's think about credit scoring algorithms. I think there are enough studies which have also shown how when credit scoring algorithms, and this is one of the use cases that it's often cited for AI, is that when they are not trained on representative data sets, they have the tendency to kind of deepen existing biases. And there are many sort of studies which show how these kind of algorithms may actually discriminate against certain sections of the population who have historically been discriminated not because they don't have the correct financial history, but because of certain socio-demographic features which historically were not considered to be fit to be lent credit. So these are important questions. These are important kind of considerations that we will have to have in mind when we are thinking about governance. And that is the reason why I think these values are important when we think about how we design AI governance frameworks. Coming to, this is what AI governance should look like or what we should pursue, but we can also look at where India stands. Where do we stand in terms of our governance approaches? So what I see is that what we have is a patchwork. We don't really have a coherent framework, but we do have a patchwork of laws. We have laws which relate to information technology laws, which is essentially the electronic transaction laws in many other countries. We now have a Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which has been there in many countries for many years. We also have certain consumer protection laws. So, of course, this is the statutory or the legislative responses, but under each of these layers, concerns around AI harms are not adequately or expressly addressed. The second layer of responses that we see are policy interventions. We have certain guidelines that are there. We also have sector-specific interventions. And I think this is important because in a country like India, we have seen certain sectors adopt AI at a very faster rate, especially financial sector. So you have a lot of financial sectoral regulators who have come up with certain kind of interventions. And last but not the least is an approach that the government of India has also adopted to encourage innovation in the ecosystem, and that is through building data exchange ecosystems. This is a way through which the government is creating platforms, or the government is creating ecosystems through which public private sector can exchange data sets for the purposes of building different kind of models. You have, I mean, in the Indian context, there are data sharing ecosystems that have also been exclusively built for building AI models. So this is what is there currently. Now, when we look at the, when I look, I'm not getting into each of these laws, but when you study this framework, there are three sort of systemic gaps that often comes up. One is the fact that any law around or any framework around AI governance needs to think about it from a, needs to adopt a life cycle approach. And the first fundamental question here is that what are the foundational protections that a governance system provides its users? So as a user in any digital ecosystem, whether it is AI, whether it is any other technology that comes, what are the, do I have a right to transparency? Do I have a right against being subjected to an automated decision making? Do I have a right to human review? So I think that digital equivalent of our Bill of Rights is something that we still need to think about in the Indian context. The second thing that happens very often is that when we think about questions of governance, it is often done through a intermediary liability framework. Now, that is a framework that is of an internet era where essentially you kind of provided safe harbor protections, or you provided legal immunity to platforms because they hosted third party content, and you did not want platforms to be held liable for third party content, and accordingly you wanted platforms to comply with certain kind of due diligence. If they did, then essentially there is a legal immunity, or there is a safe harbor that's provided to them. But that essentially does not work in the context of AI systems, because you are looking at platforms today who have reached a scale, and the kind of harms that they produce are systemic. So, and also the kind of, the development, the kind of interaction, the scalability that we kind of see when it comes to AI models or large platforms is that perhaps the intermediary liability framework is not suited, built for an internet era generation, is not suitable for this automated generation. And third is the question of what do we want to regulate? I think very often the conversations have been about, do we want to regulate AI? But you don't regulate a technology, you don't regulate a code. What you do regulate is essentially harms. You regulate the kind of consequences that that technology may have, which are not beneficial to humankind. And I think these are some of the systemic gaps that we see in the governance approach of AI. And so now these are the gaps. How do we kind of address that? The question is not about, very often, as I said earlier, the question on AI governance often comes to the fact that should we have an AI Act? Because EU came up with an AI Act years back, and so the conversation often is about, should India have an AI Act, or should we let it be like the way US has done it? Should we have a very protectionist regime like China? But I think what we need, and this is some sort of as an organization that works a lot with various policy makers on legislative frameworks, we kind of try to approach AI governance through this framework known as the code approach. Now, what does the code approach mean? The code approach means that when you think about AI governance, it has to be contextual. It has to be context specific. You cannot solve all problems related to AI, or you cannot kind of decide everything related to AI through a singular law. You need to have a context specific framework. Second is operational. Now, very often, I think we have heard, and very often there are certain lofty aspirations that are put to us saying that, AI models should be tested against biasness. There should be validation models. There should be validation testing. But I think the question is also that, do we have a common understanding of what do these mean? What what does bias testing mean? What are the kind of standards? Do we have a common understanding of these standards? And currently, perhaps not. So we can't have, I think it's for the benefit of the users as well as for any developers that we do not sort of set out aspirations which cannot be operationalized. The third is around governance, data governance. And data governance here, I don't want us to think only from the lens of privacy. Privacy is an important factor, but I think there are also questions about provenance of data, questions about how a lot of large language models, a lot of AI systems are using data, whose data are they using, how are they using it, what is the economics behind it. Even within the context of, I think, privacy, there are a lot of questions which perhaps we need to answer. Uh, let's say very often what I hear is that a lot of AI developers say that we use anonymized data sets, which means that the data sets that we use for model training are removed of any kind of personal identifiers, which means that, yeah, I mean, technically, since it's not personal data, it should not be applicable. I mean, privacy laws should not be applicable. But I think the question is, does the law even recognize what anonymization is? Does the law recognize certain common standards of anonymization? Because if you leave it to the industry or to everyone to develop their own standards of anonymization, there is going to be a case of regulatory arbitrage. So I think questions around data governance is critical. The first 3 points are essentially elements which should sit on this ethical consideration, which is essentially a rights-based framework that India or any country essentially which is thinking about AI governance needs to consider. A rights-based frameworks which confers certain kinds of rights on its users when they are interacting in the digital ecosystem. Now, the code approach, essentially, if we were to break it down, when we think about applying the code approach across the life cycle of an AI, at the foundational level is the question of what rights exist in the digital ecosystem. The right to transparency, human review, right against automated systems. At the second level of an AI lifecycle, which is around data and input, I think are questions about what feeds the system. Essentially, what feeds the system governs the system. So we need rules, regulations, we need laws on consent, provenance of data, bias in training, IP-related issues, and also perhaps prevention of data monopolies. The third stage, which is around the training stage, how is a model built? What fairness testing, what bias testing, what kind of safety benchmarks, human oversight does it mean in the context of the law? Fourth is the validation stage. How are models validated? Are there kind of impact assessments? Are there kind of supposed to be vulnerability assessments that are to be there? And last but not the least is the deployment stage. When harm occurs, who is responsible? How do you think about liability? Are your existing laws, your criminal laws, your tort jurisprudence, your product liability frameworks enough to kind of respond to that? Now, when we think about the code framework, I think one thing that I also want to kind of emphasize is that it's not a singular law. The code is not a singular law which is there to solve all AI related issue. The code is essentially to serve as a legislative agenda. And the possible reforms or the possible kind of ways in which we can think about operationalizing the code is about thinking how India, and these are not separate laws, but these are essentially the kind of legal reforms that we need to think about, are the kind of questions around digital rights. What are the kind of digital rights we have in India? What does India have a digital safety law which can perhaps move away from a safe harbor, from an intermediary liability framework? What about algorithmic accountability? I think then you need to have sector specific guidelines. Copyright law reforms. I mean, that's something that India has been working on, but this is something which is also critical. And anonymization reforms, what anonymization of data means. We don't have standards. Our Personal Data Protection Act doesn't recognize anonymization, doesn't empower the regulator or the board to come up with standards, leaving it to the industry, considering that this is an important mechanism through which model training happens. I think clarity on this is important. And last but not the least, governance architecture. I mean, we know that AI reforms, AI is going to be cross-sectoral, but there also needs to be perhaps some amount of coordination, some amount of centralization for the purposes of implementing these kind of reforms. So I think if we were to talk about the future of AI in India, I think governance of AI has to kind of account for these things. That's it from my end. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just start by asking one question, being the moderator? See, I completely agree with all the thoughts, and I'm very happy that some of the early sentiments that I explained while I was talking, you've taken it up. See, one of the things that when we had discussion with some of the practitioners had been saying, see, when it comes to AI, like I mean, I'm depending on the fact that he's acting as your agent. Okay, since you are using a tool, and finally you are a banker or you are teacher or you're anything, but you use the tool to deliver the service, so you are accountable. Okay, so accountability, liability lies in you, and I mean that is the kind of protection that you're talking. But up to I know there is you can get away with that to in a great extent, and it can be interpreted. But where it has become even more dangerous is the agentic stuff. And there again, there are going to be millions of agents that is being coming out as a service. So, and that it is going to be used exceptionally in much detail by common man who do not understand the implications of this agents, what it can do, what it when. He is no more his agent. He cannot say that, that guy is a man who took the decision to take the thing, because that is not there. So that is when the in terms of what kind of agents can be used and what is the kind of safety precautions that is be taken in making it available, who can make it available. Otherwise, it's practically every high school kid can make an agent today. Okay, and that code will help him to make. But then that prevents, so that is like a complete diffusion of responsibility, all varieties of them. So that's where I think I would like to hear, if you have done some thinking on that, I would like to hear.
So we are actually working on a paper on agentic AI. So perhaps I'll be able to answer you. But I think just to kind of also tell, I think when we think about liability questions, it also depends in terms of the use case. What I think the point is that we can't rely on contractual protections anymore. I think that's the point, especially as in more we see use cases which impact rights at such a level. So, and I think there are different ways to approach it. For certain kinds of use cases, I think even kind of extending existing regimes of, let's say, product liability, which actually EU did to autonomous machines, is something that we can think. But our product liability framework is not designed in such a manner, and perhaps I'm not sure how enforcement of that would work. But for, let's say, for high-risk AI systems, especially when it comes to agentic AI, maybe there is a need to think about going back to strict liability frameworks that we had at one point in time. So I think those will be certain principles.
Thank you. There are more questions coming. So
That question basically, see, in any civil society, there have to be reasonable restrictions. All citizens have it. So in case of AI, how do you do it? And how do you, so to say, get the Lakshman Rekha? Do you think it should be built in, or how else? And since we are talking about AI governance, it's basically a continuation of what you're saying. In case of agentic AI, it might get a little difficult otherwise.
Yeah, I think when it comes to certain kinds of use cases, I think you cannot have a situation where there is no human oversight at all. I think so there has to be a human in that chain, somebody who has to be. So that's how law works, right? Whenever law kind of impose, I mean, when it comes to a legal framework, whether it's a centralized ecosystem or a decentralized ecosystem, the law has to identify the points of regulation. And typically, the points of regulation is something which becomes the gatekeepers to the ecosystem. So that's how, I mean, law has naturally sort of operated. This will also continue to a certain extent when it comes to AI systems. And I think the point is that there has to be a human oversight when we think about certain kinds of use cases. We cannot, should not perhaps go to an ecosystem right now where we say that let AI decide everything. And even if we reach that system, the law will have to find a person who will be held liable for the purposes of this.
Thank you. I think we are running short of time. We can have much more. These are a very, very interesting and important topic. While we're having a coffee, probably we'll all trouble you a little more. But now, over to you.
My presentation doesn't have an equation, and hopefully that won't make me an outcast in the company of academicians here. But hopefully I can get the message across. So I'm going to speak in this presentation about the changing jobs landscape in India. That's what I will start with. And this is work that we are currently doing at the Isaac Center. Okay, so let me just start, where are the jobs growing? So yesterday we, like Manish spoke about, that the major objective that we have is moving people from farm to non-farm. So what's happened? So we've looked at the PLFS, which is the nationally representative employment data for India over the last 7 to 8 years. And we saw where are the jobs really growing. And what we found is that, okay, there's been almost a 9 percentage point increase in our workforce participation rate, which is great. But almost 40% of that has actually come from agriculture, followed by services, which is the next largest, manufacturing, and then construction. So while the good news is that all sectors are growing, but the bad news is that we are really not able to move people out from the farm to the non-farm sector. So our objective was to understand, okay, where are the non-farm jobs growing? Can we actually see what is happening to the demand in different occupations, and in a way try to feed into our policy of skilling and in job creation as well. So what we did is that to look at which jobs are growing and which skills are growing, we divided the jobs into the skills hierarchy using 3 definitions. One is the occupation level hierarchy, which already ILO gives us. Second, we looked at the formal years of education, and lastly, we looked at wage rate, which indicates productivity of a given occupation. What we saw, so this is going from lowest skilled occupations to the highest skilled occupations at the broadest category that is available to us. And what we found again is that within the non-farm sector, the jobs really have grown in the lowest skilled category, which are plumbers, electricians, cooks, housekeeping staff. Whereas medium to high skilled, there has been roughly 85 lakhs increase in the number of people who are employed. Let's take other skill measures. Let's take the wage percentiles. So on x-axis, we have wage percentiles. So we took the wage percentiles in the year 2018 and we looked at which are the occupations which have grown across the wage distribution. And again, the finding is pretty similar. The largest increases happened within the non-farm sector in occupations, say in the lowest 25 percentile of the wage distribution. Similarly, if you look at, what's the formal years of education required in a given occupation, you again see that the lowest 20 percentile have grown the most. There's also been some increase at the high level, but of course that increase is much, much less. So what implications does it have for skilling? Of course, we are seeing that the middle skill occupations are just not growing at all. So if anything, we might have to move workers from middle skill work to higher productivity tasks. That's one thing. And if you are to move them to if the demand is still in the currently lower skill sectors, how do we increase the productivity of our plumbers, electricians, cooks? I think that remains another critical question. Okay. So then we thought, is has AI played any role in this entire pattern that we observe in our employment data? And to look at this particular question, we took the two sort of exposure measures which are now frequently used in economics and in other sciences as well, to look at which occupations are more exposed to artificial intelligence. So there is one index which is based on abilities of a given occupation, and the second index is based on the tasks that an occupation requires. Now, just as a caveat, we don't have this classification for India. So we've actually taken this classification from US task data, which is the ONET. And we feel that's a major statistical lacuna in the country because, a construction worker in India is not the same as a construction worker in the US. In fact, a job like airport cargo handler doesn't even exist in the ONET database because such a job doesn't exist in the US. They just don't use a cargo handler. A person just keeps their luggage on the conveyor belt. So that's a bigger agenda that we have at the center. But okay, let's just take whatever measures we have as of now, which are the best. And they basically look at all the abilities and all the tasks a given occupation requires, and then they use LLMs to say that what is the extent of substitutability or use of AI in that particular task or ability. And then they construct an occupation-based measure. We had to do a lot of mapping because this is US occupation codes. We had to use it for Indian occupation codes. We had to create a concordance for that. And even within India, occupation codes have changed from 2018 to now. But we are done with the grunt work. We have all the concordances ready. And if anyone's working in this area, we're happy to share it with the others as well. So just as a measure of, again, just as a caveat, this reflects technical exposure. This doesn't really mean that you will be substituted. If it's productivity enhancing, you can also increase the number of these occupations. Just by way of an example, radiologists haven't fallen, right? Just because radiology, like AI and radiology can come together. In fact, the demand for radiologists has actually increased in the last 5 years. So exposure doesn't necessarily mean that you will be substituted. Okay, so on the x-axis, this is the AI exposure indices. We have the one measure based on abilities and the other measure based on tasks. And again, we see that the occupations which had the lowest AI exposure score have grown the most in the country. The one above 80th percentile have actually also grown. The growth has been less, but it's not like we've not grown at all or the demand has fallen in these occupations. It's still increased, but of course, the bulk of the jobs in the non-farm sector are still coming from the occupations which have the lowest score in terms of their AI exposure, which again has implications for skilling. If you're going to skill people or reskill them, we want to skill them in tasks which are not routine and move them from routine and low cognitive work to perhaps either high cognitive work. Or if we're moving them to low exposure tasks, then they at least need to be better trained for the same tasks that they're doing. Now, which occupations are most affected by AI exposure? In fact, the most exposed occupations are the ones which are higher skilled. So the blue are the high skilled, the yellow are the middle skilled, and red are the low skilled. So the least exposed are also the least skilled occupations here. But here, just again, a caveat, because we don't have granular 6-digit level occupation data in India. We are doing 3-digit level changes right now. So the entire software database network professionals is like one big category that we have. We really don't know within them what is data science, what is just basic software coding, etc. So I think a more granular measure is perhaps is required, specifically if you want to understand how task composition is changing. Okay, this you've already seen. Okay. So what did we do? So we wanted to, also understand, can we actually upskill people, right? So what we've seen is the demand for jobs is changing differently. Perhaps the nature of jobs and tasks which the same occupation may be doing will also be changing. So we wanted to see if upskilling can help people move from these tasks which are getting automated or are now being done by AI, and hence the demand is reduced, to actually move into an occupation which is increasing in demand. And in this work, which is co-authored with Gaurav, Ashwini, Nandini, and Niharika, we targeted the demographic group of women who have been out of the labor force, and around, women in India tend to take 3 years of median career break. And we were interested in the technology sector because this is a sector where skills are rapidly changing. In fact, most of these women whom we interviewed, before they actually took the career break, they were doing routine software management, basic coding tasks, maintaining, supporting, and documenting the IT systems. But now, when they are back in the labor market after 2 or 3 years, these jobs are no longer existing. And they're finding it hard to get back into the labor market. They've been in the tech sector. They want to be in the tech sector. In fact, they're getting jobs in the non-tech sector, but they really don't prefer those jobs. So they want to stay in the tech sector, and they want to sort of upgrade their skills and try to move into jobs which are more in demand within the tech sector. So we designed an experiment in which we invited applications for an upskilling program that was done by our implementation partner. So our implementation partner works specifically with returnee women, and they work in collaboration with Infosys Foundation, which has a platform called Springboard, on which they upskill candidates in different sort of streams which are in demand. And so we had about 1,500 to 1,600 women who applied for this scholarship. So it was a completely free course that we had provided to them. And when we spoke to women, there were two kinds of skills or skill deficits that they spoke to us about. One was the technical skills, which they felt that had really eroded for them in those 2 or 3 years that they had taken a break. And second was soft skills, which are also like professional skills like communication, networking. How do I apply for jobs now? It's been a long time since I've been out of the labor force, so help on that front would also be useful. Given the we only had about 400-500 scholarships that we could actually pay, and there was a huge oversubscription. We then gave the tech skills and the professional skills to about 500 women, only the professional skills to the second 500 set of women, and then 500 women we did not offer anything, and this was randomly done. We will open it to them as well at the end of this year when more fundraising is done. This program was run in 3 batches. From April 2024 to January from April to January 2025. While we offered them 3 types of upskilling programs, so based on the market assessment, we were told that data science, cloud computing, and front end development are the kind of occupations or which are increasing in demand. So upskilling in these would be good. But when we checked, in our form, we had a preference. Which course would you prefer? More than 80% women wanted to do data science. For some reason, cloud computing and front-end development wasn't it didn't find favor amongst women. So eventually, we had only the data science course, which involved Python, machine learning, as well as applied data analysis. And the course it was for 3 months. It was delivered in 2 ways. One, the live sessions that were done by our implementation partner, and along with that, and usually these live sessions would be done either by Infosys existing employees or employees from their organizations, as well as assessments that would happen on Springboard. So Springboard sort of works as an LMS, which provides them content as well as assessments which they have to take. So in a way, it's very distinct because usually in India, skilling is done and assessment is also done by the same person. But here you really had an independent way of verification of these skills, even though the live sessions were being done, by someone else, and the actual assessments would be carried out by an external platform. So what was the adoption? This one worry that I had is that, how easy is it to upskill? We always say, oh, upskill, but is it easy to really upskill when the gap between what you knew and, what we would like you to know is huge? So 99% took up the offer who were offered the program. 87% attended at least one session. But as the sessions went along, we saw there was a dropout. And eventually, only half of them had attended at least half of the sessions. That is what you would expect from them. 50% attendance. How many of them actually completed the certificate, like the entire certificate? They could have done sub-modules, but we wanted to look at the entire data science certificate completion. Eventually, 25% managed to actually fulfill all the criteria required for the certification. But many of them had done sub parts, and they did claim that they had taken away some skills, although we were not able to give them the final certificate because of lack of assessment. So then we looked at, okay, we did our midline survey. In fact, it's still ongoing. I'm presenting results, as more data points are coming in. So far we've had an attrition of about 20%, 25% from a sample of 1,500. And first concern we had is, okay, fine, we're doing this, but maybe women go to other platforms, they do data science, or they do other courses from other platforms. But that didn't happen much actually. So in our control group, only 30% enrolled, and I don't have the figure for completion. Only 5 or 6% women actually completed a data science program, and perhaps something had to do with scholarships, etc. I'm not very sure, but clearly the control group women did not enroll as much as we had suspected would happen into other data science courses which might be offered by Coursera, etc., because they can also go and take courses there. What happened to their skill acquisition? So just in terms of technical skills and soft skills, huge difference, almost 200% difference in the women whom we had offered the training. So even though many did not complete the certification requirements, at least they had gained some skills from attending these sessions, or attending or going through the material on the LMS, because we also had a separate test for skills, both for technical and soft skills. Okay, so now coming to the interesting part. So we wanted to see, okay, has employment changed for them? Of course, it's too early. This is midline, which is only 2 to 3 months after training was completed. So women who actually underwent training have not really gotten a chance to have an extended job search time period. So currently, we're not seeing any effects on employment. In fact, if anything, slightly negative effect. But is the nature of work changing? Results are not significant, data is still coming in, but we do find that they are much more likely to be in a data science role, so about 3 percentage points as compared to the control group. So there is some meaningful shift in the nature of work that the women are doing who are employed. Did their job preferences change? So something that we always worry about is that, do these skilling programs also change the job preferences or job search strategies of people? Because if that happens, then the fact that you're not able to find employment could just be because your job preferences have changed. And we clearly find evidence for this. So now women who underwent the technical skills program, like again, almost 50% more likely to want a data science role, as compared to the control group. And they also are now looking for more hybrid or remote work, because data science is something which you can do remotely. In fact, a lot of data scientists actually work from home or do work in a hybrid format. And I think because they have acquired skills in this domain, they think they can actually now they're okay with looking for jobs which are home based. They're also more likely to search through formal channels like LinkedIn and online job portals. So their job search strategies also change. Did the job search effort change? Well, the number of applications have fallen. That would happen if the job search actually reduces. They haven't really gotten as much time. Given that we don't have as much time left. Okay, this is not moving any forward for some reason. Okay, the thing is stuck. But just to sort of end, that was just a summary slide. I think what our upskilling, experience has shown, at least with the demographic group of women, is that it's not easy. There was a lot of fallout. Only 25% could eventually get full certification. So it's not going to be easy to upskill people, to move them from occupations which are growing less to occupations which are growing more. But given at least the midline results, the job preferences have changed, the job search strategies have changed. This is a very specific demographic group, so one also has to be aware of the fact that there's employer discrimination for women who've taken a career break. In fact, in another study of ours, we found that women who've taken a career break are 50%, they get 50% lower callbacks. So if out of 100 applications, a usual woman having similar skills would get 50 callbacks, a woman with a career break would get only 25 callbacks. So that could also be playing out. Maybe this upskilling is not enough to shift the employer preferences for these women, and which is something which we want to test out in our N-line survey as well. But I guess some learnings and some hopes here. I'll just stop here. Thank you. Happy to take any questions later, I guess.
Thank you. We had a fantastic panel. Unfortunately, the organizers are staring at me saying that, Koshy, you are not controlling your time, and we have very distinguished guests who have joined us. I know, I'm definitely. So I'm going to warn the people sitting here that don't ask too many questions. Leave her with 1 or 2 questions, and after that we'll line down.
I think everyone's tired. Okay, Manish.
I mean, do you think skills creates, the supply create demand or demand create?
So I'm like, that's another hypothesis, and that's a whole employer side. So if there is no demand, I'm like, if the demand is so static, and there are enough people which who are there in the market, so why would you hire these women? That's again the demand side argument. So if you because at least why we took up these occupations is because the industry experts or even Infosys felt, where are people, where are the jobs growing, which are the sectors in which jobs are growing, and they felt that these 3 occupations is something which are growing in demand and which would continue to grow in demand in the next 3 to 4 years, and that's why we chose them. We didn't have the demand side angle, but maybe the increase in demand is not sufficient.
What happened with Apple? We'd given 70,000 people, right? And we thought, it doesn't matter. It's 8 weeks for you just give them a pulse, and in 8 weeks they made an iPhone, right? So, they really do a huge selection or huge as long as we give them, and they give her dawns, and then they pay 27,000. They take away to 1,000 for food and this. But we're able to do that. So the supply, isn't the demand more important than the supply?
I'm completely with you. I feel that supply side interventions will not work if the constraint is demand. In fact, we've shown that in other work. But because we are interested in AI and skilling, we wanted to test out, will this even work? And, this was the group that we tried to test out. But the entire first piece that I showed you, I think that is demand driven largely because we looked at wage employment. We didn't look at self-employment, because self-employment can just be push and not pull, I feel. People are referring to self-employment as the last resort of something they can do if they don't find a job in the labor market. And there you see that it's the lowest skilled and it's the very high cognitive, within the high skill, you see that the 3 categories of occupations that fall in high skill, it's the first and second which are increasing in demand, and the third one, which is so-called, I would say, in the category of, say, coding skills or basic coding skills, they're just falling, or like clerical skills, they're just falling in demand because they're just, I think, more amenable to AI as well. And but this is not just because of AI. If you look at the decade of 2000s, when computerization was happening, we had seen the same pattern then as well. That there was a polarization and you had increase in demand both at the high and low skilled. The difference this time might be that high skill is also affected. So either you move the lower skill within high skill into the really high skilled sort of sectors, or they will fall back into the lower skill segment. But creating demand is important. If you don't have demand, then no matter how much you skill them, it's not going to work. I agree with that.
And you're using high skill, low skill as a wage take, right?
Yes, you can use it as a wage.
You're using it as a wage, or are you just because there are lots of high skill jobs in people's minds is very low?
No. I'm referring, because we refer to the wage percentile. That's why I just didn't want to look the traditional way of classifying occupations. We use these three ways, and even if you look at wages, same pattern.
And when you're looking at portion of the pyramid, are you finding the school play out?
Falling. School premium.
Skill premium versus the demand quality premium swirl. School and skill, what is your view on that?
Skill, it's very difficult to test because we don't measure skills, we just measure occupations. But if you look at school premium, it's fallen. So both class 10th and class 12th, I think a lot of these, so there are two hypotheses. One is the fact that so premium can fall because of two reasons. Either the lower segment has grown, or because this school segment has not grown as much. Lower segment has grown because minimum wages have risen in the country in real terms. So there has been some boost at the lowest end because minimum wages have increased. I feel because of the fact that middle occupations are not growing as much, and class 10th educated or class 12th educated would actually go into this middle skill jobs. Now, where are they going? They are most likely going into the low skill sector. So why should the premium increase if now they're going to get as much, as a low skill casual worker? You will find that the difference between them has actually come down because minimum wages have pushed the wages of the low skilled worker up, and this middle skilled person is now being pushed into this low skill segment. Of course, the gap between them is going to narrow.
It's slightly different from what you're trying to answer, and probably related is, do we know what to skill them on? Because right now the assumption is it's going on a certain trajectory, and I understand at least on the lower end we had kind of figured out, we still weren't sure about the demand part of it. But now with even higher skill setups, I don't know if we are skilling them right.
I don't even think we figured out the lower skill part. Look at the skill level of our plumbers and electricians and cooks. There's no way look at the salary that the same occupations get in the developed country. It's nowhere near. The extent of difference between a middle skill and low skill is is still huge. So I don't think we've figured out the low skill part as yet. The skilling ecosystem is just not giving them adequate skills, which has increased the productivity. But I agree. In fact, the entire reason why we did the first part of, these are two separate papers, but we did the first part because we wanted to understand, which are the occupations which are growing. And as we started looking at the question, we realized that India doesn't have a task skill mapping to occupations. It exists in our national skills qualification frameworks, but they were updated in 2022. And
even the own it is not great, right? So
yes, so we can't even talk about this. I agree with you.
Thank you. I think it's time up.